Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our study of the book of Origins, Genesis. I'm John Walker, and I'm sitting with Bruce Watson, the minister of the Princeton Church of Christ. Bruce, where are we in our lesson?
We're in the narratives in Genesis that discuss Jacob in particular. He's going to be the main figure for the future because his name's going to be changed to Israel, and he's going to have 12 sons that become the 12 tribes. But in the account thus far, we see the spiritual beginnings and the spiritual journey of Jacob. Jacob doesn't start out a righteous man. His name literally means one who takes advantage of others, or the deceiver. And he lived up to his name by catching his brother at a weak moment, Esau, who was the oldest, and taking his birthright away from him, the right of the firstborn. And then a little bit later, with the help of his mother, he deceives his father into giving a blessing that he was planning for Esau instead to Jacob. So he truly was a deceiver. Then the consequences, of course, of these deceptions was that his brother became very angry and threatened to kill him. And so as a result of that, Jacob, who loved staying around home, who was mom's favorite, had to run for his life. He couldn't take anything with him. And his mother instructed him to go back to where her brother was and his family. And so as a result of that, she persuades Isaac to send him back to get a wife. And on this journey back, during a dream, Jacob has a vision. And there he sees angels coming and going from heaven. And the Lord speaks to him and renews the covenant to Abraham and Isaac with him. And then when he awakens, he gets up and anoints the rock who thinks he's found the gateway to heaven. And then he has the first beginning spiritual phases of growth where he says in his covenant with God, if you take me safely on this journey, and if I succeed there, find a wife, and then I come back safely home, then, after all those iffy things, then you can be my God. So at this point, he recognizes that this God he's met at Bethel is the God of Abraham and Isaac, and he's kind of negotiating with God. If God comes through for him in the specific ways he outlines, then, you qualify to be my God. So this is, of course, a very immature approach to faith, but at least it's the first inclination that Jacob is going to have faith at all in anything other than his own manipulative powers. And so we pick up the journey in Genesis chapter 29.
Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the east. There he saw a well in the open country with sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would turn the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, my brothers, where are you from? We're from Haran, they replied. He said to them, do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson? Yes, we know him, they answered. Then Jacob asked them, is he well? Yes, he is, they said. And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. Look, he said, the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture. We can't, they replied, until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and the son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh." Bruce, reading here, how was Jacob received by his relatives?
Well, think about it. The last time Laban got a visit from his relatives afar through Abraham, they brought a lot of gold and enriched him and purchased a bride, Rebecca. And so perhaps he was thinking maybe there's some gold involved this time. But that's not, of course, the case with Jacob. Again, we see that Jacob is guided by God just to the right place, to a well where the very sheep of Laban will water. When he comes up to the well, we're told that a very large stone lay over it, where it took shepherds, a group of them, to be able to move it. And so he was wondering why no one had moved. Oh, we're waiting until everyone gets here. And then he asks some questions about where are you from? And he gets very terse answers, but he discovers that he's at the right place. Then they say, well, you're asking about Laban. Here's his daughter bringing the sheep to the well to be watered. And then we see Jacob is no wimp. He goes over and by himself removes this large stone from the well and allows Rachel to water her sheep. And then he, of course, tells her that he's a relative, and she's startled. He begins to cry. He's so relieved to finally be at his destination. And then, of course, she goes and tells Laban. He comes out and gives him initially a very warm welcome. And so we can imagine that Jacob is greatly relieved that he has made it safely to his destination and has been received by his mother's relatives. But the story goes on.
Just picking up with the second half of verse 14. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. And Bruce, how does Jacob like being deceived rather than being the deceiver?
Yeah, it seems that God is going to take Jacob through the school of hard knocks. So you've enjoyed being a deceiver. How does it feel like now to be in the hands of a master manipulator like Laban, who gets you to come up with an extravagant number of years that you're willing to work for his daughter that you love, one who's identified as being beautiful and having a a figure that was to be admired. He was willing to work 7 years, which is an extravagant amount of time. But of course, remember, you had to give a dowry to the family in the marriages at that time. And Jacob had no money, no cattle, no sheep. So all he could give was his labor. And he was willing to do so for Rachel. Again, we see that as he describes Rachel as beautiful, a good figure, the only thing that the account can say for Leah is, here it says weak eyes, but it could be delicate eyes. Well, she has kind of delicate eyes. She's not pretty, she doesn't have a good figure. And so consequently, Jacob wasn't attracted to Leah, but he was attracted to Rachel. And so Laban does as they did in those days, make a great feast, invite the people from all around to share in this festive event. And of course, a combination between the bride always wore veils so you couldn't see her. Number two, they were at a festival where I'm sure that Jacob drank enough wine that might cause him not to be as perceptive as he should be, and it's very dark. Those three things combined the fact that he didn't recognize he had married and gone to bed with Leah rather than Rachel until the next morning. And then, of course, he says, what have you done to me? Why have you deceived me? The deceiver just can't believe other people will do to him what he has done to other people. And he doesn't like it at all. But then clever Laban says, well, finish out your week of the marriage bed, and then I'll give you Rachel for 7 more years of work. And so Laban gets 14 years of free labor, and he is able to marry off his older daughter, whom he may not have been able to. But notice his line of reasoning, which is interesting. He says, well, it's our custom that the older must marry before the younger. And it's the very custom of the older taking preference over the younger that Jacob had totally upset in his own family. He had replaced his older brother with his birthright and his blessing. And so it's as if Laban is saying, well, we don't do those things around here. We follow tradition and custom. So now you're going to have to suffer the consequences that you violated that principle in the past, and you couldn't see this coming because you were not perceptive enough. But again, it was deceit. It was consequences for Jacob for being a deceiver and a supplanter. And so, again, the venue is set for, unfortunately, he loves Rachel, but not so much Leah, and that's going to create some real tensions in the marriage as we read.
Picking up at verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, it is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Simeon. Again, she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. So he was named Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will praise the Lord. So she named him Judah. Then she stopped having children. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children? Then she said, here is Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So she named him Naphtali.
So think about it. Two things play out here. Jacob's life is all about struggle. He struggles in the womb with his brother. He struggles to get his brother's birthright and to steal his blessing. He struggles to survive, to make it to an escape to his mother's family. Now he struggles to work to earn a wife and is deceived, now has to work longer for the woman that he loves. And now the struggle continues within his own marriage as the two sisters he's married to are somewhat in competition with one another. Leah, the unloved one, God has great compassion on and allows her to have 4 sons. And the important thing about sons was in the ancient world, sons, of course, could protect your family. They could extend your wealth. They stayed with your family. It's the daughters that were married off to others and then left the family. So it was important that you had sons for a variety of reasons, for economic purposes. And secondly, in the ancient world, there were no universities for girls to go off to and to get a good job. There were no good jobs outside of the home. And the most valuable thing that women had to offer in the ancient world was the ability to birth children so that the family might grow. You needed to have a lot of children because they were your social security plan. If you had a lot of them, it was no burden on them to take care of you in your old age. If you had no children, you had no one to take care of you. So it was a very essential thing, as well as making you prosperous. It also served as security in your old age. And Leah was given by God the gift of 4 sons. But in naming them, you see the great internal struggle that Leah was going through, wanting to be loved by Jacob. God's seen my misery and now he's given me a child. Oh, eventually I'm going to name this one attached because I'm hoping this son will cause Jacob to be attached to me. It's only on her first son that she turns away from trying to connect with her husband, seeing this as not a likely proposition. She simply names the last child the praise of the Lord himself for giving her children. Now, notice, Leah was not jealous of Rachel because she was more beautiful and had the love of Jacob rather than her, but it's Rachel that's the jealous type because she doesn't have children. And so what does she do? She throws a temper tantrum. Give me children, Jacob, or I'll die. And of course, Jacob says, that's a lack of faith in God. It's only God that can close your womb and that can open your womb. It's not me. I don't have the power to do that. So again, each daughter was given a servant woman. And so she gives her servant woman, very much like Sarah had done earlier. And 2 boys are born to her. And the way she names them, she clearly sees herself in competition, an arms race with her sister, naming the last one, My Struggle. The first one, I'm Vindicated. So a lot of unpleasantness must have been going on between these sisters in that family. And Jacob had something to do with that because he showed favorites, just like his mother and father had favorites of their children. And so he was creating a lot of this mess in his own family. But the drama is not yet over. We pick up in verse 9 of chapter 30.
When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, What good fortune! So she named him Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, How happy I am! The women will call me happy. So she named him Asher. During wheat harvest, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he had brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, Please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too? Very well, Rachel said, he can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. You must sleep with me, she said. I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband. So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son. Bruce, what are mandrakes and how do they play into the story here?
Very common, kind of like pumpkins that grow on the ground, a fruit that's very common in Israel. It was believed by the ancient people that you could crush these mandrakes up and put them, eat them for food or put them in what you drank, and that it would cause women to be more fertile. So this was a common belief. There's no scientific evidence that this is the case. Ancient belief about this particular product. And so we see Leah follows in the steps of her sister, so she gives her a servant to Jacob so other sons can be had. And then one of her sons comes in and brings her some mandrakes, and Rachel wants them. And then you see some bitterness from Leah. So, you've already stolen my husband from me, that he doesn't love me anymore, which probably means he's not showing me any affection or spending any time with me. Now you want to steal my mandrakes. And of course, Rachel's thinking, I need it. Maybe that'll help make me fertile. And so they do a business transaction. So Leah gives the mandrakes to Rachel so she can purchase Jacob for one night's sleep. What a mess this marriage had become. All these parties played into this unfortunate situation. Well, God listened to Leah's plea and allows her to have a couple more boys and then a daughter named Dinah. And the reason I bring her up is there may have been other daughters, but Dinah will appear later in the story in a prominent event that occurs. But then finally at the end it says, God remembered Rachel. Just like I said, God remembered Noah in the flood and saved him. So God remembers Rachel and allows her to conceive. And she says, God has taken away my disgrace. And she names him Joseph, which means may he add. So the idea is this is number one, but I'm naming him in terms of I'm wanting another child. Now notice Rachel said to begin with, give me a child or I'll die. And now she has a child and she says, this is not good enough. I want more. Well, she's going to get one more child, but she dies in childbirth. Beware of what you think you want and what you think you need. It may bring unintended consequences into your life. And so for the petulant Rachel, this was going to be the case. But the drama continues.
Verse 25. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. He added, name your wages and I will pay them. Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored will be considered stolen." "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be as you have said." That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. Bruce, why did Jacob request wages, such wages, and what's the reason for that?
Think about it. Jacob knew Laban. Laban was a very materialistic and greedy man. Jacob wants to go back home with his family, but Laban's not willing to let him go. He had found out that the reason why, since he had prospered so much, was the presence of Jacob. Remember the promise of the covenant, "I'll bless those who bless you." And so as a result of that, Laban doesn't want to lose his lucky trinket, Jacob, that's blessing him so much, which he found out through divination, which means, of course, Laban is an idolater. But he did discover a truth. And so he says, "Look, I'm willing to pay you." And of course, anything he would have required, or back pay, or "I want this part of the flock," would have created a lot of tension. And so he says, "Don't give me anything. Let's just start from now. And I'm going to only take the sheep and goats that are unique." Now, you have to understand, in the Mediterranean world, almost all the sheep, like 90% of them, are white. And the goats are like 90% black. And so they're just one color. And it's just this 10% or so genetic deviance where they have spots or streaks or something, where they're not pure white or pure dark color. And so when he says, "I'll just take those kind of animals," Laban's thinking, "Boy, I've got a good deal here, because these are rare. He's not going to get many of my flock. So while the rest of my flock prospers, he's going to get this small, minuscule part." And to make sure the deal, in no way does Jacob manipulate it, he sends his sons to take care, Laban does, of the spotted and speckled sheep and goats, and then puts Jacob in charge of the all white and dark colored, so he can't have any influence over the ones he'll eventually take. So clearly Laban is trying to manipulate the situation further to his advantage. But think of it from Jacob's viewpoint. If you simply said, "Oh, I just want to take 1 out of 10 of the sheep that's born," how could you keep up with that when you have a number of sheep? And couldn't Laban always say, "No, those are white, they're my sheep"? And so by taking only the odd colored ones and saying, "That's all I want," when it comes to the end to say who owns what, it's very clear who owns what, so there could be no dispute. So it's a very shrewd decision by Jacob. And of course, Laban doesn't get the point that God's going to bless Jacob no matter what he does. And so he thinks he's got this great deal, and Jacob stays around. "I'll continue to be blessed. I'll get richer and richer, and that's what I'm here for." But that's not exactly how the story turns out as we continue to read in the 30th chapter.
Verse 37, Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in the heat and came to drink, they made it in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals, so they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Now, Bruce, how did Jacob try to manipulate the situation to his advantage?
Now, this may sound very strange to us, but he thought he had the latest in scientific technology. Well, all I'll do is take the bark of these various trees, I'll skim it off so that it looks white, and I'll put those in the troughs in front of the animals that are mating, and they'll have streaked and speckled children for some unknown reason. Well, it's kind of magical thinking on Jacob's part. Jacob thinks he's got a scheme to help him succeed. Jacob's not fully trusting that it's the Lord that's going to bless him. He's got to put the odds in his favor, even though there's no known benefit to putting these things in front of animals that have more spotted and speckled descendants. However, he did do one thing, and that is that he put the strong sheep in front of them versus the weak. So you're trying to breed the strong of the flock, and it did turn out that Laban's ended up with some of the weaker sheep, and he ended up with the stronger. And the bottom line is that Jacob grew exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, etc. So he prospered. He really didn't own anything up to that point. Nothing was his. And now he had become exceedingly prosperous. And of course, this was going to create problems, which we pick up in the next chapter.
Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw the male goats mating with the flock where streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, I have answered. Here I am. And he said, look up and see all the male goats mating with the flocks are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. And Bruce, how did Jacob convince his wives to leave their home country and to go back to his home country?
So it's interesting. This whole section begins with Jacob hearing the grumbling of the other sons of Laban, that they think it's Jacob stealing from them because he's prospering so much compared to them. And even Laban himself, who had been predisposed to like Jacob because he'd been blessed by his presence, he too has an attitude change. And then we find that the Lord comes to Jacob and says to him, like Abraham, leave this place and go back to the land, the promised land, where you came from. So as a result of that, now Jacob has a simple problem. How am I going to persuade the two daughters of Laban to leave the security of their home, where all their relatives live, make a dangerous journey, and go back to a place they've never been and be around my family, where they don't have any idea whether they'll be accepted or how that will work out? But basically, he makes a very good case for this. He calls to their attention the attitude change. There's going to be some problems ahead if they continue to stay. And then he tells them, remember, your father's changed my wages 10 times. So this initial deal, I got all the spotted and streaked and speckled. Evidently, when those sheep began to proliferate, all of a sudden Laban changed the deal. No, you only get the speckled one. Oh, no, you only get the spotted one. He kept trying to change the deal, but God overcame all of Laban's attempts to manipulate the growth of the flocks that Jacob would take. And so we see some faith in Jacob. He says, so God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. So Jacob is beginning to believe this isn't just his manipulation, but that God has been at work. And then, of course, he tells them that he had in dream, he had a vision where the Lord identified himself as the God of Bethel, where Jacob had an encounter with him, and tells him, you should come back home again, and I'll be with you. So after hearing all of that, we find Rachel and Leah say, what inheritance do we have here? We're not going to get anything from our father. It's all being consumed by the brothers here. And whatever should have gone to us, he squandered in his own ways. So we really have nothing to gain by staying here. So if your God has told you you should travel back home, then we're willing to go with you. So he's persuaded them. And he has to have the right occasion, because here is Jacob leaving with his wives and children, moving large flocks. That's a slow progress. And he has to get a head start, or else Laban might catch up with him. Well, he waits till Laban goes at a distance to shear some sheep. He takes some of his relatives with him to help him in this process. And so Jacob and the family and all the flocks head out back to the promised land, cross the Euphrates and get into the hill country of Gilead. Well, meanwhile, back at the ranch, Laban suddenly discovers they've all gone, and he gets a war party together of all his relatives. And no doubt, as he explains it later, his view is, they've stolen my daughters and all my wealth. We've got to go get this man. So he gets a posse together and they head out. Well, they're going to move as a group, probably of males armed. They're going to move much more rapidly. And so they catch up with Jacob and the flocks. We see this is where the drama begins. And of course, one little footnote. So they're leaving, and then Rachel, what does she do? She takes the household god. What does that say? It says that Rachel is an idolater. For security, she doesn't want to leave these gods behind. Now, household gods are just little figurines that are made small, have in your house, not the big things, idols and temples. But this is a very common thing for people to own these things in the ancient Middle East. And so Rachel believes somehow in the power of the god. So she's going to, put the good favor on her side by taking the gods with her. And of course, this is going to create quite a problem. And so we pick up the account and see what transpires in all of this drama.
Verse 22. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled, taking his relatives with him. He pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You've deceived me, and you carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered Laban, "I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of all relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. After he had came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." So he searched, but could not find the household gods. Bruce, what was Laban most concerned about with this confrontation?
Well, keep in mind, he brought his relatives with him. Laban has to persuade his relatives to support him in his attempt to coerce Jacob either to go back or to take the flocks away from him or to get his daughters back. He can't do this on his own. But of course, God appears to him and says, don't you say anything good or bad about Jacob. I don't want you manipulating this situation. And so probably the harm he intended to do to Jacob, he is now hesitant to do. But he probably still has ambitions to take all the flocks back, even if he can't get his daughter. And so what does he do? It's like making a legal case in a court before his relatives to persuade them of the righteousness of his cause. And so Laban exaggerates. Oh, they stole my daughters like captives, like they've been taken here against their will. And and here are all my flocks. And why didn't you tell me? I would have thrown a feast. We would have sung joy. I had to kiss my daughters, my grandchildren. Well, of course, Laban would never have done such a thing. He would not have permitted Jacob to leave if he had asked that permission. We've already seen how he had refused that earlier and come up with a scheme to keep him there. And so he's saying, but on top of everything else you've done, you've really done me severe harm. You've stolen my household gods. So we see what's important to Laban. Laban's an idolater who doesn't believe in the one creator God. He believes that Jacob does and that Abraham does and Isaac, but not Laban. Laban may believe he's a god, but he believes that other gods have power as well, and he serves other gods. So, of course, Jacob tries to respond to this, and he says, look, I left because I was afraid you would take my wives and children away from me by force. But, you know, I'll just say right up front, he says, if anybody's stolen your gods, then they deserve to die. Of course, Jacob has no idea that Rachel's done this. And so they start searching the tents, and the tension increases as they finally come to Rachel's tent. But being a clever schemer, Rachel lies on her saddle and says, forgive me for not getting up. I'm having my period. And so the men that have come along with it think, oh, okay, we don't want to get involved with that. And so not the first or last time a woman will use having her period as a possible excuse for a variety of different things. And so it works for her. And then we see that the drama continues as Jacob has something to say in return.
Verse 38. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you for 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, here is the heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Ner, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. Now, how did Jacob convince Laban to let go and make a covenant with him?
Well, basically, he just simply goes through the logic of what's taken place. Everyone knows he's been a conscientious servant of Laban, how he's worked long and hard, how he didn't take advantage of his father-in-law. He instead went out of his way, even when in normal course of taking sheep, you expect the wild animals to get some, and you expect some people to steal some, and the shepherd isn't 100% necessarily responsible for all of that, but Jacob made himself responsible, or Laban expected him to be responsible for these. And he's worked day and night, heat and cold, for 20 years. He earned the right to marry his two daughters. He earned the flocks that he now has. But here, I think we also see Abraham's faith is now growing on Jacob. For he says, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. So he would have walked back home, no kids, no wives, no flock. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. So now, because of what Laban has said, Jacob realizes, God stood up to Laban in a dream and warned him not to mess with Jacob. And so Jacob is growing in his faith of this one God. Now notice he refers to it as the fear of Isaac, which may refer to the terrible situation where he was put to be a sacrifice on the altar by Abraham. But also, Jacob has a very basic faith, and fear often is stronger in these early stages than faith. So basically, he makes a very convincing case that Laban doesn't have any right to any of this. And so the relatives are listening, and clearly Laban sees they've been persuaded. So he's not going to be able to do what he'd like to do. So then he does the next best thing. He has to come up with some reason why he's taking everybody all this distance, and why there needs to be some sort of convocation here. He still won't admit they're not his. He says, all these women are my daughters, and children are my children. The flocks are my flocks. But I'm going to be generous. David says, I'm going to be generous. He's been out argued and reasoned. He says, what are these children? And come down, let's make a covenant between the two of us. And so Jacob, in light of what he's done before, puts a stone up as a pillar, asks others to bring stones. So this big heap is there, which will be a landmark for generations to come, where people will remember the covenant was made between these two peoples. And of course, Laban calls it one thing because he's an Aramaic-speaking person versus Jacob, who names things in Hebrew. But Laban's request is, I don't want you mistreating my daughters, and I don't want you marrying other women, which are all unlikely things to have happened. But Laban had to act like there was something he was still concerned about, to appear righteous to his own relatives. And so it says that Jacob made a sacrifice. He professed an oath that if he would keep up to that, they both agreed they would not cross this boundary marker to harm one another. And so after the covenant meal, they slept. Early the next morning, Laban and his folks got up and left. And so this intense episode is now resolved. And no doubt Jacob and the family are relieved, because this could have been a catastrophic slaughter. It could have been an event in which Jacob lost everything. But the one true God has intervened on his behalf. Basically, what we see in the Jacob narrative is Jacob moving from the deceiver to the believer. Now, it's not an instantaneous move. God has to appear to him to begin with to get the ball rolling. God had to make promises to him. Even Jacob comes up with an iffy covenant. Well, God, if you do all these things, then you can be my God. And so part of that's been fulfilled. He hasn't quite made it back home yet, but he's been safe and blessed thus far, and he's beginning to recognize it's not my clever manipulations, it's God that's protecting me. It's God who's blessing me. And so he's in a much better place spiritually than he was to begin with. And so we'll continue to read about Jacob and his spiritual journey. Now he's going to face, in our next encounter, a very dangerous situation where only the intervention by God can end up with a positive outcome. How will Esau respond to the return of Jacob? Life is full of uncertainties. You and I don't know what kind of tragedies may come our way. Some of us are struggling with things at this very moment. Life is filled with struggle and heartache and loss. There's only one thing we can count on as stable and secure, and that's not death and taxes. That's God. God is always the same. And if we are in a covenant relationship with God, he will bless us and protect us. That is his promise, and that is our hope. And I pray that that's a reality for your life.
Bruce, thank you for your guidance and making more deeply this account with Jacob and his encounters with Laban. And thank you all for joining us in our continued study of the book of Origins, Genesis. Let's pray. Dear God, we are elated that, Father, you are such a good God that you don't, for the sake and the merit of our actions, bless us only, but you bless us according to favor. And we thank you for your patience and endurance as we become more faithful members of your forever family through our trials and building of character. I ask that you be with us, protect us, and guide us until we meet again. We thank you in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Goodbye, everyone.